is, for the folks who are joining, what you're joining is Creative Entrepreneurship for Social Impact. And just to like catch folks up, I'm going to read the description. Creative leaders understand that value is about more than money. Creative entrepreneurs are often community organizers with a keen eye for impact metrics that go beyond the dollar. So join me, Executive Director of Vital Spaces, Raashan Ahmad, and Keshet, is that how you say it?
Keshet.
Keshet Dance Company Artistic Director, Shira Greenberg, for a curious and open-hearted discussion about the potential of creative entrepreneurship for social impact. So let's just go, Shira. I mean, maybe you want to just set us off by talking a little bit about yourself and what you do and how you fit into this world that we're talking about today.
Sure. Yeah. Well, this is great. I'm so excited to be here and talking with you. I mean, so I kind of, I think, come at this at a couple different lenses, maybe. Um, but I started Keshet Dance Company in 1996. So it's been about 28 years now. And really, I think, as I was reading the prompt for this discussion and thinking about like, well, like what are some things I like nuggets that I feel are important to me. I feel like a big component has been about being responsive to the world around me versus prescriptive. And I think that sometimes when you're coming in and you're starting your own thing, there's like, here's how we're going to do it. It's going to be exactly this way. It's going to work this way. And and I think that in any entrepreneurship realm, that can be challenging. But so really like how do you how do you be a little fluid in the process and how are you responsive and honoring the creative work and the creative spirit that you come to the work with, but then letting that kind of fluidity and that kind of natural creative space take its way with you. And so the work that I do, my background is in dance and choreography, and so I was coming into this work as a dancer and a choreographer, but really looking at um, a little bit of my dissatisfaction with a traditional realm of what the dance world had been in my limited experience, and being kind of um, limiting to who got to access that. It was really about like who gets to access the art of dance and why and how and in what manner. Um, and so I'm not from New Mexico originally. So when I got here to New Mexico, that was really a question that I just asked for about a year. Like, what would this look like if dance was accessible, and what does that mean? Like, who needs this? Who might need dance in their lives? And that was really the beginning kind of springboard of what we were creating. I knew my world really was about contemporary dance, and I felt a little frustrated with the structure that had been at the time, at least in my spaces, where professional dance lived in one space and community engagement lived in another space, and those didn't connect to each other, and if they did, one was way more heavily weighted than the other. And I felt like, well, can we find a place where both of those, you can honor the quality and the professionalism and the artistry of the contemporary dance, but also honor the power of community impact and community engagement, and what could that look like? And so that was my question, really my kind of driving question to community was, where is impact needed? Where is support needed? And and that, when I say I talked places, like it was city council meetings and neighborhood associations and just sort of any place I could just say, here's what my vision is. Some people took me seriously, some people didn't. I was 22. People were like, that's nice, dancing girl, you know. Um, but but the power of that conversation, from that, a couple of different entities came forward. One with Carrie Tingley Hospital and Carrie Tingley Hospital Foundation, and one was the juvenile prison system. And of those two conversations, both of those really, I was able to say, okay, you've answered the call I put out there. I know dance. I don't know these other industries as well, and these other community um, systems. I mean, one is more community, and one is definitely a systemic issue structure. And really just pose the question back to say, well, can we partner? Can we learn more about what it is that is needed, and I can build curriculum around that? And so from the hospital side, people were really into it. They were like, yeah, awesome. let's dig in, let's support, these kids, which our program has now grown from kids to kids and adults and all different ages and types of abilities, but really looking at how do we build dance for physical accessibility. So many of our dancers dance from wheelchairs or use walkers or maybe blind or deaf or other structures that maybe might not say to the initial eye, oh, that is a dancer, but really for us we're saying any body, any type of body can be a dancer. And what does that mean, and what do we make sure we're doing to bring that all into community? On the juvenile justice side, we had a really different response, and really this much less hopeful perspective of people saying this is a program to keep kids busy while they're on a track that isn't necessarily, it wasn't very positive. And it was surprising to me how not positive it was, for what the forward facing messaging of rehabilitation structure was intended to be. And so from that, I think we really dug in to say, well, this is fully about listening. This is fully about, let's get into this space and hear from the kids what they feel like is needed. And from that just is where that program really developed and has been going for now 28 years, of first just being in the space and saying, we're going to dance, and then trying to understand, well, what does dance mean in this space and why is it critical? Why is it not just a dance class for movement, but why is it a choreography class to honor each individual voice and choice, and every type of thought process and choice making that we can work collaboratively to create something. That was really powerful. And then once that started to develop, like, we were really able to say, you build a lot of trust when you create together, and so we were able to, I think part of the important formula we had was that we were coming in as artists, not as any other component of a punitive system. We were saying, we're here as an artist, we believe you are an artist, and we're going to create together. And so that was our work. From that platform, we were able to say, well, what else is going on in here that you need support with? One of the big things was education, and really needing support within their education system and feeling frustrated and saying, well, what does it look like right now? Well, right now they're just getting a book to read English or math or science, and no support in the absorption of that material, and then feeling bad about yourself if you're not doing better in school. And so I said, can I get the books? And so we got the books, and I was like, I think I can dance these books. I do need to relearn algebra in order to dance algebra, but I can do it.
Mhm.
and then just really building upon that. And so that just kind of that process of listening and responding led to a whole different type of a curriculum model, led to students' grades going up, led to a better understanding of those systems, led to a foray then into policy change work to be able to say, well, what can we do to make sure some of these systems themselves are changing? So we're not just in there trying to fix the system, but we're really looking at the longer game. And so that was sort of this long process of evolution of where we're still in, really looking at then how are we not only supporting some systems change, how are we supporting kids when they're getting out, still embedded in creative entrepreneurship, still embedded in the dance community. How are we looking at the other end of the spectrum to say, how do we prevent them going in to begin with? So just where are all of those pieces, and really staying rooted in dance while we do all of that, to say this is part of the reason why this works, is that it's about the art that we're passionate about. So I don't know, I just ran on and on and on with some stuff. um, but so yeah, so that's kind of how that all evolved. And really that's been our work, has been honing in on the areas where we feel like there are some answers to access that we're able to address, and say, is it about financial access? Well, let's make sure everything we do is on a sliding scale starting at zero, whether that's classes or performances or anything. Let's look at, every type of physical access point. Is it about wheelchair accessibility? Is it about you're in a space locked up and therefore you don't have physical access to get to us, we get to you? Like, what are the ways that we're making sure this pretty powerful art form gets to people, and then let it kind of beautifully explode from there. So yeah.
Beautiful. I love that. I'm just so curious, like initially when you were like when you came to New Mexico and you asked that question, why why did you ask that question? Where did that come from for you to have that question to ask?
Yeah, that's a great question. That's how I got that question. Yeah, I think the way that I grew up in the dance world was in a more narrow mindset of where what dance was and who danced and what you did with dance. You danced and then you joined a company and then you finished your career somewhere in your 20s and then maybe you taught and like there was sort of this limitation due to body type, age, like all sorts of different things. And if you had an injury, go do something else, So and I had an injury in my late teens, and in my brain, that meant I wasn't able to be a dancer anymore. And so, um, fast forward a few years, I ran into some people who were like, I'm going to take a dance class. And I was like, you can't do that. Your career is over, and they were like, no, that's not how it works. And so really kind of rethinking for myself, like what powered me, what brought me the most joy was dance. And why did I seem to think that there was a limitation of how and when I could um, use that as a tool and a resource and a guide in my life? And so then that really got me thinking about, well, why did I think that? And what is it about the field as a whole that was creating that for me? And that's not to knock the field. The field is amazing, but my personal experience just had that moment in it. And so really investigating that for myself and saying that's weird. I don't know why I spent so many years thinking that. I'd really like to prevent that in other spaces, and more than just prevent it, I would like to make sure that there is a lot of other people that know about the power of this art form and are able to utilize it and feel um, fully grounded in believing it's theirs just as much as it could be anybody else's, and knowing that this tool, this art form, um, should be available to everybody. And what that means, what that looks like, is going to look different on every type of body. But that doesn't mean the power of it is any less critical for building connection, for building confidence, for building understanding across differences, for building like all for changing policy, for touching people, for connecting with legislators who are making policy work to say, like there's just so many ways that this art form can be
Mhm.
utilized, and it felt very limited in many spaces. So that was sort of the question of like, well, who feels like they might want a spark of some of this, and I didn't really know what that meant at the time. I think it was really just this big open question of like, throw it at me and let's see what we do with it. Um, but I really tend to love that fluid process of creating and seeing what kind of comes at you, and then taking that and building upon that. So
Oh, so good. So so good. It's such a trip because like I I run an arts nonprofit, but I'm new to this world, right? And so I also in my late teens had an injury that stopped me in dance, right? Dance is my first love. Like that's like my heart, right? But I grew up in LA and it was not the dance that it was like I was dancing for videos and like on stage and for like in that whole scene, right? Like battling in clubs, like with my crew, right?
yeah,
But so I didn't even have dance as that sort of an option. Just during the pandemic, when Alvin Ailey released some of their work online, was the
yeah,
first time in my whole life I saw a body that looked like mine move like that. So I didn't even know that that was even a thing or even
yeah,
possible,
yeah,
right? But I spent most of my career after I got my injury and I couldn't dance, right? After I couldn't dance, the doctor literally said, "You can't dance anymore," and I believed him. Right? I
I
know. Isn't
know.
that
Why are
ridiculous?
we listening to these people?
I don't
Right,
know. I
right.
don't know because I
Yes.
was like in my late teens and I was just like, "You're a doctor. You must know what
Yep.
you're talking about." But I took up my other favorite thing, which is being an MC. I've been like a professional MC, poet, hip hop artist, and so my career has been traveling around the world doing that. Right? I've been But it's rooted in like the culture of community that hip hop is rooted in, which is, you know, a real, it's not disconnected from community. The art and community in the world that I have been trained in, for the foundations of hip hop that I've been trained in, are not disconnected. So when I go tour, but then I'm in a refugee camp, right? And I do a show, and then I'm in a youth facility, I'm in an English class, right? And it's always been that intersection of arts, culture, and activism, right?
Yeah.
And like, um, how does that all work together? And like during the pandemic, when everything was like, no, you're not going to do any shows anywhere and do anything, actually, um, I was an artist at this place called Vital Spaces. Vital Spaces is an organization I run now, which provides like access and resource basically for folks who don't have it. So we give like free, low or no cost studio rent for folks who need it in buildings. We have free art supplies that we give away to whoever wants them. We throw pop-up markets where vendors have to pay no fees. Everything is for everyone, but we really focus on low-income, BIPOC, emerging local artists, right? That's our main goal, and to make sure that folks have access and space. And so it's been such a trip walking over the line into this world of like, oh, people are I don't know, doing some of the same things that me and my friends have been doing without the language, right? And the understanding that these are even like options, right? And so when I was looking at this topic, when I was looking at the topic, like, what is this? Like, how do I even understand what this even is and how to say it? And I kept saying it in my head, and I was like, oh, what is it? Creative entrepreneurship for social impact. And in my brain, I translate that, how to make money while doing good for your community, right? And I'm like, oh, okay, I got that. I know what that is, right? Because just as an artist, I've had to navigate that. I'm an artist and a father, right? So after a while, like me doing things for the love became like a joke in my house, right? Oh, you're gonna do it for the love? Like that's just ridiculous, right? You have to figure out a way to kind of do both, to be an artist, but also to be able to sustain yourself and your family. And we work with so many folks who are just, you know, as creatives, it's hard to make a living. There's so many
Yeah.
like GoFundMe's for like medical bills, and it's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
So like it's really been a real beautiful learning, uh, trying to figure out how to support creatives in making businesses and making lives that are prosperous and
Yeah.
good, and off of what they love to do, right? And for me, I believe that putting those folks in positions of power, like having culture running institutions or being more embedded in them, is just going to have that result, because like the people who are creating usually can't help themselves, right? Like dancers can't help themselves, like artists, painters, poets, musicians, DJs, breakdancers, potters, you know, we can't help, we have to be making. But when it
Right.
comes to, okay, now we're gonna sell this, if sell is the word that we have to use, the middle person is usually the one who profits and usually becomes the foundation for like the container that we're all like living in, which
Yeah.
no one likes. It seems like it's extractive and it's transactional, and it can be really gross, right? And
Yeah.
so I'm really excited to be like in the space of working with creatives, doing like business accelerators, trying to figure out how to like grow businesses, helping folks do artist statements and prepare tax forms and find out about opportunities, working with grants and filling those things out to figure out how the heck to do this whole world of things that just feels so impossible so many times. And I'm sure, you know, so many folks are just so burnt out and heartbroken by trying to make a living off of their art that they just kind of either like give up or just become sad humans, you know, who are doing their art with their heart broken, which, you know, brokenhearted art is also amazing, right? As we all
Right.
know. But also it's like there's got to be a better way, you know? So
Right.
I don't know. I wonder like what are some of the ways, even like small ways maybe that you've uh learned that might be available to folks? Like how do you think about this?
Yeah. 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 I mean, don't sacrifice the artist for the art, right? Like, I mean, that feels like, I mean, one of the things that when I first started Keshet, one of the um things that I did was I just like took every little class I could find on like any little anything of like grant writing, budgeting for non-accountant artists, like just all the little things you could do. And I just sort of soaked it all up. And one of the things that we developed about 12 years ago was a program called the Keshet Ideas and Innovation Community, which is really all of these classes that I feel like I kind of got nuggets of as I was starting, like having those resources. And it's heavily a mix of like, what is the information that I did get that was really great from mentors? And what are all the really dumb and expensive mistakes that I made that I would like to tell someone, you probably don't need to do this because I already did it. It was a bad idea. Don't do it. But one of the big things in that conversation is really about valuing your time as the artist, right? Like, yes, we're always going to do it for the love. This is true for sure. And it's common both from the artist side, from the activist side, from community organizers, like we are doing things because we are passionate about it. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't put value on that beyond love. Love is an important value within it, but and the reality that we know is you're not always going to have the dollar value right there ready for it. But if you don't also name it and call it the dollar value that it actually is, it's very hard to manifest it in any other way, right? So even if you're going to spend 2 years working on this project and you know that you're going to pay yourself $2,000 over the course of the time working on this project, but really you're putting in 30 hours a week for the entire 2 year period. You should value that time, and you should like literally calculate that exact amount of time and say, okay, even if I was getting paid, whatever it is, give it a number. I should be getting paid at least $25 an hour. And for my $25 an hour, here's what all those hours, I can't do that math that fast, but whatever that is, um, that's a contribution to your art and to your endeavor. And from definitely the perspective of anyone who's writing a grant proposal, that not only becomes important just to say for the philosophy of saying it, it becomes really, really critical for the how am I getting the rest of the money to underwrite this, And so oftentimes when you're writing a grant, funders will have parameters around, we will only fund 50% of the project, but the other component, that can be a project of in-kind and cash dollars, blah, 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 blah. So maybe your project is only, you're putting $10,000 towards it, but there's really in-kind contributions of another $30,000 or $60,000 that's going towards that project, right? If you only call it a $10,000 project and that funder is only going to be able to fund 50%, you can maximum ask for $5,000. If you're able to show my project is actually a $60,000 project with 10,000 cash and 50,000 in kind, my request is $30,000 to this funder, and you just start to change the game a little bit of how are you organizing, whether that be as a nonprofit or as an organization that's using a fiscal agent and structuring your grant writing, but naming the amount that you are giving in love and putting a dollar to that really, really took me a long time to realize, oh, this is actually a number that I need to say, because it will never turn into a real number if I don't actually say it and call it and know what it is. And no one else will know. And the field as a whole, like if you think about, what you put out there into the universe and into the world, then we just keep perpetuating the problem saying artists are, work for free, artists do it for the love. Like we also want to raise our children and we also want to like do all, we want to be able to turn on the air conditioning if it's hot, and we want to be able to fulfill ourselves as well financially and survive so that we can make art that is based on happiness, not just about the brokenheartedness of struggle in that. And so what I feel like that was a big kind of moment for me to realize like this actually has to be named and has to be called. I might not get to the goal financially, but I know what it actually is and I'm saying it. And that changes the conversation with funders long term. That changes the conversation with patrons. That changes the conversation with that middleman kind of transactional person of what is actually the value of that art that is being moved through in this process. So I feel like that's a big one for me of making sure that doesn't need to change the love that you have around it, but
Mhm.
it's important to acknowledge what you are giving to it.
Yeah,
So
yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think about I think about that more recently that I've kind of entered the world of grants and nonprofits. And there's also this other kind of there's only so many grants to go around, right? Like everyone's not going to get the grant, right? So I also think about um, the folks who are maybe not in that position or place, and like how do you like I just discovered grants, right? That hasn't been an option for me on how to make money.
yeah,
And now that I know it's there, I'm like, oh my gosh, look at all this money that's out here, right? It's
yeah,
amazing. Um, and then I think also, there's a lot of times where artists maybe start at a certain place and have to work up to the point where, if I say I'm worth this much, do you see my worth is that much? There's that whole discrepancy too, right? Of like
right.
everyone's, if you're just starting versus if you've been doing it for 20 years or 10 years or, what your impact has been. Um, I think that's one of the hardest things to not only communicate but to understand about um, ourselves and each other and creatives in general, right? Is that all of us are worthy of of it all, of air conditioning, right? When it's hot.
Yeah,
Right? But how do we
yeah,
get to that when, maybe we're at the beginning of our journey or folks just don't value what we have as much as um, someone else who may either for the reasons of knowing how to write a grant better, right? I'm learning that now. Academic language is like huge. Um,
totally.
or just has like a longer runway, has been doing it longer. There's only so many grants, right? Like what are I wonder about the other ways to be sustained outside of grants because that's just such a long shot for so many. For some, it's not. Some folks can, I sit on our city's arts commission and I watch who gets grants regularly, right? Which organizations get them. And I'm like, oh, people have it down. They know how to do the thing. And yeah, it can be somewhat of a barrier, it seems like.
Yeah,
Um,
for sure.
let's answer these questions since
Yeah,
we get too far in. Are you seeing this, Shira? Can you see
I
the
am.
yeah.
Yes. Okay. Oh my gosh, questions. Okay. Let's see. But I feel like just before I lose that point that you were saying too, I think that yes, there's a lot of there's a lot of barriers to accessing funds, whichever way you're coming in at this. And I think that part of that is really looking at like I think that was a big component for us as I was growing Keshet and having the luxury to be able to try to navigate some of these barriers, trying to look at well what are some of these barriers and what is Keshet's responsibility in this ecosystem of cracking open some spaces in some of these barriers? Is it creating spaces where people can learn and grow this on their own? Is it creating funding flow that can come through that can just get to an artist without having to go through a proposal process? Like, is it a mix of all those things? Is it what is the money needed for? Is it for us, for performing artists? It's for space use. Rental is tricky, like, so is it just about saying, forget even having to write the proposal or even get just here, have some space to use and access? Like, so what are all of these kind of ways that we're trying to come in at this? And so I think we're still in that process of like, we've done a lot of these pieces and a lot of it is sort of just throwing spaghetti at the wall and being like, well, who might need this? You don't want to force a need on somebody, and like, well, what is needed? What's the most useful?
Mhm.
um and different things are useful at different times in everyone's career and journey and art form. And so yeah, I feel like we're still in the middle of that. So sorry. Okay, I didn't want to lose that thread though when you
Yeah,
were
no,
just saying
thank
that.
you. Hmm.
um um I am not familiar with Gabrielle Roth's The Wave. That's a question, but I will become familiar now that this question is in here. Um, um, so this one is to your point about GoFundMe for creatives, essentially working in this way in the upper echelons of artistic expression. The only difference is the wealthy donors are funding the arts in a way that creates unjust sense of exclusiveness. As an interesting point, how to create a new economy that is inclusive for all artists. Agreed. I mean, the reality is we live in this world in the US in a society that has transactional structure and, capitalistic model of who manages what money and gives it and takes it in different ways. And so I think that it is a call to action, I think, for artists of how do we support each other and how do we, I think it's, to the point of the work that you're doing, like, how do you get resources to artists? How do you, and that hits part of it, right? It's not necessarily getting them groceries and air conditioning and all the different things, but how are we creating an ecosystem together that builds upon all of these different needs and also finding the ways to help navigate through those barriers. If somebody's needing support writing the proposal to get into that
Yeah.
next echelon of, funder awareness. I do see a trend though, it's not super fast, but I do see a trend from the funder standpoint that is really trying to address that as well.
Hmm.
I can say when I started Keshet 30 years ago, it was a challenge. It was a huge challenge to try to get paid attention to by funders. And that took a long, long time. And because our work is a intersection of arts and social justice, that actually confused funders even more. And so arts funders were like, well, we don't fund social services. And social service funders were like, well, we don't fund the arts. And I was like, it could be the same thing,
Yeah. Yeah.
And now it's a little bit more kind of buzzwordy for lack of a better term. You know what I mean? Like it's part of the structure. It's understood differently and it's valued differently. And so that's changed for us. That's been really important that we were able to hold on until like funders kind of started to understand and agree with that model.
Mhm.
But I think because of that, and now because we are able to say, well, we have longevity in this work,
Yeah.
part of our job is to say there are a lot of other people who are doing this work that need different resources than the types of resources we're getting right now. And so how do we kind of crack that levy open a little bit differently?
Yeah.
And I do think funders are more receptive to that than I felt like that was 20, 30 years ago.
That's great news. Yeah. Do you know how to crack that levee open? Like if you have all the resources and you're the ruler of the world, like do you know how to fix all this?
Well, I mean, if I was the ruler of the world, that would be easier. But I think that in my current position of non-ruler of the world, I would say what I have found is just consistency, like keeping that consistent message going. It doesn't work for me to show up to a funder and say, I think this is an important thing you pay attention to, and then never go back to them and remind them of that. And so really it's about every funder that I work with that is in a position that could be opening a pretty significant levy. That's my model is to say, let me have just a check-in meeting with you. I know it's kind of on your radar, but it's starting out there all the way, but your board is making a new strategic plan, but blah, 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 blah. Let's have the conversation. I'm going to call you again in 3 months and I'm going to see where you're at so far. And that's just sort of a consistent, like I have a I'm a little obsessed with spreadsheets. If anyone is on this call who already knows me, they know that I love spreadsheets. But in the spreadsheet thing, I mean, that's the thing I've got going on is like that sort of communications piece of like, how are we just chipping away at it? Because it is a long game
Mhm.
process. It's not a we're going to talk to a funder. They're going to be like, oh, what a great idea.
Right.
Open the floodgates. It's really chipping away and then hitting it at the right time and finding the right program officer who's going to get the ear of the different board member who's going to be at the right time in the strategic plan reorganization. But that takes years of chipping. And so I feel like that's been important for us to be doing that because that's our model with the policy work too. It's not an immediate shift that people hear, oh, the juvenile justice system is not helping the youth of our community, like, and so that takes more than one conversation and that takes multiple directions and multiple conversations and multiple approaches. And so that same model really, I feel like, is applied to this bigger conversation on artist funding infrastructure.
Mhm. And what's the pushback you get, Shara? Like when you get the no or the I'm not interested or whatever, what are the pushbacks you get from from legislators or donors, or you know, when you come with all of this, like why not?
Why not for funding, or why not for?
For funding or for just support in general, like the constant like trying to gather and trying to and pushing and you know reminding. Why what are the no's, like what are the reasons?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of reasons are, that's not our focus area, that's not our priority area right now, or we're spread too thin, or I need more statistics to convince me that that's really a good thing, or we're really looking at this in higher education, we're not looking at this in community based, or we're, like, I mean, there's like any number of reasons of, and the reality is that every funder can't do everything. Like, it is important that from a funder perspective, they have their own organizations to run, and they have their own social impact goals that they are trying to fulfill. And I think that's also part of it for us, is to recognize and respect, like, it's the same way we would seek out a partner programmatically. Like, we want to make sure our values are aligned, our goals are aligned, um, and our process of getting to those goals
Mhm.
feel aligned.
Yeah.
So not every funder is the right fit for us to be a partner with. Not every organization is the right fit for every organization to partner with. Otherwise, you kind of never get, you'd be spread so thin. So for us, it's also really looking at, well, who should we be investing this time in, and does it make sense to dig in? And then those reasons of why not often become why not right now. And then it's a process of the timing and the developing and building trust. It's like any relationship, right? It takes time to build trust. It takes time to build an understanding of each other. It takes time, and I don't remember who said it, but there's a really great quote of, relationships develop at the speed of trust, and that just, it takes time. And so, I happen to be a relatively stubborn person. So, so in this particular circumstance, it works really well, where, I will be patient, and I will continue to chip away until we get to the answer that we want, or until we get to the realization that this is just the wrong path to go down, with a particular partnership. Um, so
Yeah, that
yeah,
makes. There's a question here. Do you have to be a nonprofit or for-profit business to make a social impact? Can you be both?
I think you can be both. I think you could be nonprofit, for profit, individual. I don't think there's not a business model to doing good in the world. I mean, you are ideally doing that
Yeah.
however you do it. And that, I think when you intersect that with the art that you make and the creative spirit that you have, I think it's such a beautiful tool, because you're making impact with this resource of creativity and creation and possibility. I feel like that's the thing about, creating, is you're creating something out of nothing. Artists are creating things out of nothing, which is what entrepreneurship is, right? Like, you're making something because you envisioned it, and you as an artist are making something because you envisioned it. That dance movement that just happened didn't exist before, and that piece of pottery did not exist before, and that painting did not. And all of these things, I think that, especially when you're looking at like artists who are moving into this entrepreneurship mindset, all the tools are there. As an artist, you are a creative human. Well,
Yeah.
I think all humans are creative humans, but as an artist, you're doing that as your sort of daily muscle building, right? You're using those creative muscles, and it's the same muscles to build the business. It's just saying, well, how am I going to get creative, understanding and navigating this obstacle? Like, as an artist, you're always turning obstacles into opportunities.
Mhm.
As an entrepreneur, you're doing exactly the same thing.
Mhm.
And so I think a little bit is just sort of that fear of the unknown, of like, well, I can identify as an artist, but how do I identify as a business person or as an entrepreneur? And really, they're transferable skills. And so how do you take that language that and those muscles that as an artist, and just apply them over to this other space,
Mhm.
where I think that's where creative entrepreneurs thrive, because they are already creative. And so You're not trying to be like, how do I take my accounting background and become an entrepreneur who, maybe thing. I'm not bashing accountants, by the way. I love accountants, and but I think that there's this misunderstanding that it's a whole different
thing. Yeah.
tool, a whole different skill set, and some
Mhm.
of the words are maybe some of the language is different, but really the meaning underneath them all is the same meaning that you're using as an artist.
Yeah. Yeah. I
And
mean,
so yes, impact in all ways, for profit, nonprofit,
mhm.
individual artist, all the things.
Yeah. I mean, you said you love spreadsheets, right?
I do.
So how do you
I didn't know that before. I do now.
really? You didn't know that? You like, did you start using spreadsheets and you were like, I love this? Or you didn't know that about yourself?
I didn't know that about myself. I was an artist, and I was, and then I don't know how many years into Keshet, one of our board members was like, Shira, you cannot run a budget like this. Like, you let me sit down with you and introduce you to the beauty of the spreadsheet. And then now I can't stop. Now spreadsheets are that brings me comfort and joy. But yeah, I mean that was, to me, that itself is its own, like, you have this tool in which you can creatively think about how are you structuring your project, how are you structuring your business, what happens if you make this choice financially, and what does that do, and what is that, like, there's so many resources that you can get out of that, that to me it's similar to when I'm choreographing a piece. If I'm going to move these dancers here, have this here, do this here, what is the ripple effect that happens throughout? I now have the ability to do that from a business standpoint on a spreadsheet. Um, and it changes my ability to be successful in the business side of it, the same way it translates to how I can be successful when I'm creating a piece, if I can map that out and I can understand what I'm creating.
Yeah. If you had to give like a couple other ones besides spreadsheets that have seemed to, I mean, it seems like that was pretty transformative, right? When you got to that,
Yeah,
the creative that was going into like your thinking in your business or um, your role at Kesha, like what would the other ones be? Like what will be some other things that you would suggest for creatives who to maybe learn or to pick up or to go take a class on or take a course on? Like what are some of the ones that have had the biggest impact?
I feel like for sure, like the spreadsheets and the financials were really, really helpful for me to understand kind of the way that that flow works, so that I could understand and predict and make adjustments accordingly.
Mhm.
Um, I think also really understanding the perspective, like from the fundraising side of the funder. So for me, as I was really delving into grant writing um, and pursuing funding for the work in that manner, flipping the perspective and sitting on panels and being the reviewer of proposals to understand what it felt like from that side, and the challenge that it is to be like, oh my gosh, I have 50 amazing projects and we only have the funding to fund 10 of them. One, realizing that's a reality. Two, seeing what it was about the proposals that made it through that cut and didn't, and
Mhm.
why the particular way of describing work or clarity of the proposal was helpful to me. Changed how I wrote proposals by understanding, and I still do that periodically. I mean, I think that's the other big thing, is like never ever stop learning. I feel like you're always needing to refresh your tools. So that kind of perspective of the funder, and then also really just um, understanding partnerships like that differently. And I think in the earlier days of Keshet, it felt really personal when I didn't get funding, and it was like, why don't they want to fund it? It's really good, and we're doing good work, and realizing that, one, there's limitation in some of this, but two, there is enough funding in our community, and I think that there is a mindset often that, like, we're in this financial scarcity space,
Mhm.
in New Mexico, or in any community that people are working on their art in. But I feel like the opposite is true. I feel like this is a really, really generous community, that I think once I started to understand that the funders are equally looking for the partners to execute the vision for a better world that they have, and their tool to do it is by allocating funds. and you have a desire to make the world better through your art and through the work that you're doing, it's just about finding the correct partners.
Mhm.
So not stopping when someone says no and feeling like, well, then no one's going to fund it, or there's not enough money, or there are resources. Some of that's through foundations, some of that's through businesses, some of that's through individuals, but we have a really generous state, and
Mhm.
also a lot of people who are looking for ways to be connected to good work happening. And the reality is it's kind of a numbers game, right? Like the percentage I think of no's you get on proposal writing, if you're going that route, is like 80%,
Right.
and so if you know that going in, every time you get rejected, you're like, great, I'm one closer to getting the one that doesn't get rejected. And it doesn't feel as bad. It just feels like part of the process, and you're prepared for it, and you know it's happening, and you
Yeah.
understand the workload, so that it's not like, well, I'm going to write two proposals and assume that's going to cover it. If I know I need two, I know I need to write 10, you know? So
Yeah.
yeah,
And what,
yeah. So I think just understanding the landscape helped a lot.
totally. And how did you start to understand the landscape? Like how do you find all the resources that you're talking about? Like where's all this money at, Shira? Like how do people find
Yeah.
in their way to
Well,
that?
I'm still looking for it. I am still seeking it. I just believe that it is all there.
Mhm.
But I do. I mean, Keshet wouldn't have been able to sustain 28 years if that wasn't able to still have to be happening, And so I do think that it is there. It is finding the right connections. I think that the way I think I do a lot of. I try to be in as many like listening to people's conversations and reading. I'm on a million email lists, and I'm not reading every single thing, but I'm checking through everything to be like, well, what's a trend right now in nonprofit funding, and what's going on with community foundations, with government funding, with state funding. Like I'm kind of I try to maintain as much sponginess as possible to understand what trends are happening, what resources are available, what resources are no longer available. So I'm not spending time doing something that isn't going to be helpful. Um, I think I think in addition to people's financial generosity in this state, people are really generous with their knowledge. Like if I find someone who I feel like, oh, I think they've done a lot of really interesting things, or they've navigated these hurdles that I see in my future, I'll reach out and say, I understand from what I've read about you, this is what you've done, and I think this is coming upon us soon. Could I take you to coffee? Could I have 30 minutes to talk to you and ask you a few questions? Could um, and so really I feel like I ask a lot of questions. I, I like to kind of dig in, and, there's some people where I'm like, okay, I only have enough context to understand 20% of what you just told me. Can I come back to you in a year when I understand this even more and ask you these questions again so I have more understanding? So I feel like I feel like just reading, asking, listening,
Yeah.
absorbing,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah. Yeah.
and yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Do you
and
feel like
making mistakes. I'm really good at making mistakes.
yeah,
So, like,
yeah,
I feel like learning from like, I think that's what we know as artists too. We're good at beautiful failure. We're good at like trying something and having it not work, and having that not be the reason why we never make something again, right? Like,
totally.
we will make something again, and so I feel
Yeah.
like that's a big part, is just not feeling bad that you made a mistake. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the process of building anything.
Yeah. Do you do you do you feel like you need to separate your artist self from your business self? I are these where's your choreographer and dancer in all of this? Is that person like
Yeah,
over there when it's time to do that thing? Or how do you navigate your own being?
yeah, that's a good question. I feel like there have been times when I thought I did, like those are supposed to be two different parts of my hat, or different hats to wear. And I had a wonderful mentor who was like, it's the same hat. You're just turning it around a little bit different at the different section of it. But I don't think so. I feel like me being an artist helps me as as an arts administrator and as a fundraiser and as a business, as an entrepreneur. And me being an entrepreneur helps me as an artist. So I feel like my days of trying to separate those are are not of interest to me. There's definitely a mindset of like, you know, am I just typing da 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 da, or am I like gonna just like change my brain and my body a little bit and get into a studio and work differently? But there was a piece that I made where the dancers were like, Shira, you realize you are choreographing a spreadsheet right now. Like I am in your spreadsheet. And I was like, maybe I haven't separated that enough for
Good.
today. Like
Yeah,
I should get that out of my brain. But yeah, I think that they feed each other a lot. And I think that I've learned a lot from both sides that informs the other spaces. So
that's
yeah,
awesome. Yeah. And when do you dance? Are you still dancing?
I'm not dancing as much, but I'm still choreographing a lot. So yeah, we're in the midst of two new shows that we're creating right now.
Where
Yeah.
and where are you? You're in Albuquerque. Where? Like, where's your
We're in,
space?
yeah, we're in Albuquerque, in Midtown Albuquerque at the Keshet Center for the Arts, which we were able to open with some funding from federal funds. So it's like in right by Green Jeans Farmery and Stone Age Climbing Gym, and and there's a big building with a lot of mural on it, and that's us.
Mm,
And so yeah, and part of what's been important about opening that space is to make sure that that space is always offering resources for artists. So just kind of what I was talking about of like having a space to come ask those questions. We have various series of classes that are just on like, can I learn grant proposal research, writing,
mm.
budgeting? I do a whole thing on spreadsheets because I can't help myself. But
Nice.
marketing and branding, intellectual property law for artists, like various things of like what is it that I felt really grateful to have learned from different people that we want to kind of create space for that learning to happen.
Awesome.
So yeah,
We have like a couple minutes, but I do think we have a couple questions I was wanted to get to.
cool.
Um, that I make commitment. So excited, large nonprofit is demanding it be so. Yes. How can we provide opportunity for more diversity in municipality arts commission boards and nonprofit board members? Mm,
It's a good question.
yeah. How can we do that?
Um, I feel like there's a lot of information that needs to be shared with community to say that this is available, right? Like I'm not involved as much on the municipality side on arts commission boards, but I do feel like um making sure that the offer is available to all community members. I feel like for in terms of nonprofit boards, that's something important to us to say like we our community that we serve should be represented by the decision maker. Our decision makers should represent our community.
Totally.
Um, yeah.
Yeah. Um, Laura, Mike, and Jinjoy, we have to close out, so I don't think we're going to get to your questions, but thanks for asking them and thanks for being there. And hey, y'all, I know a couple of y'all, so hey. Thanks again, Shira. I really appreciate it. I'm going to come visit and like fill out spreadsheets with you and find
Yeah,
data.
that sounds amazing. I actually have a lot of things I want to talk to you about still
Yeah,
now that I have
definitely
thoughts
so.
on. But for anyone who had the grant writing questions and things like that, I don't know where my if my email is in the mix, but people can definitely reach out to me for
Where can they find
more.
you? Do you have like a Instagram or Facebook? Are you on the socials, email?
Yeah, well, I'm personally not as much, but Keshet is. But so Keshet Arts and our website's keshetarts.org. And my email is just Shira at keshetarts.org or info@keshetarts.org, whatever is easy to remember. Um,
Okay,
but
cool.
yeah,
Out there. Thanks again, Shara. Thanks everyone. And if you go into the chat, I think Emily just dropped our links.
awesome.
Thanks for joining us, everyone. Nice to meet you, Shara.
Yeah, so nice to meet you and talk with you.
You too.
Thank
Farewell.
you.
Bye,
Bye.
everyone.